Sure. Are we ready? Oh, hold on, I'm going to make a record. All right, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, yesterday during the course of our hearings and proceedings yesterday, for purposes of the record, relevant to the request for a continuance, I neglected to reference the article I did in chambers later, but there was an article in the Washington Post that was published on March 12th of 2021, wherein the Washington Post reports that a Minneapolis official said the city had been concerned that this announcement could affect the trial. The official, who was not authorized to speak.
What was it?
Pardon?
What was that? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. So I'll just restart, Your Honor. A Minneapolis official said the city was concerned that the announcement could affect the trial. The official, who was not authorized to speak publicly, said the city consulted with Hennepin County Chief District Judge Todrick Barnett, who told the city it could proceed. Barnett did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I think it's just simply for purposes of establishing the record relevant to the motions yesterday regarding the release of that information.
And I don't know if Judge Barnett is clarifying
I don't know
that is
either.
not an accurate statement, but I'm going to leave that to him and
Yes.
dealing with the media.
But in terms of any of the requests for relief yesterday, I do think it's a question of who made this decision to announce this. So.
And I think the bottom line is this is a federal lawsuit. This court was not involved. And as I recall in my discussions with Judge Barnett, the answer was, we can't tell you what to do. And I think he expressed the concern that we would have about doing such a thing in the middle of jury selection. So there was no approval by this court. We had no authority to approve any release at this time.
I just simply am making a record.
I think the city is trying to try and dump their responsibility back in the court where it does not belong. Nevertheless, it is what it is, and we'll deal with it tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right, let's go with our first juror. Actually, it's the whole panel. That's right. Any seat, be just fine. All right. You can be seated. Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, excellent. If you have any trouble hearing, we do have hearing assistance devices. My name is Pete Cahill, and I'm one of the judges of the district court, and you have been summoned as potential jurors in the case of the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. A person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure that the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions to all the prospective jurors, which must be answered under oath. First, thank you for filling out and returning the questionnaire that was mailed to you. Your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best served by you continuing to provide full and complete answers to the questions that you will be asked today. Those questions will follow up on issues from the questionnaire and possibly other topics. Now, after the questioning is over, the attorneys will have the right to excuse some of you from service on this jury, and I may excuse others of you for what we call cause. In either case, it does not mean that you're not a fair person. You should not take offense in being excused. I also ask that you not take any offense at any question that you might be asked. We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore opinions you might hold and to hear about experiences that you have had that might affect your ability to serve in this case. The defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. In the course of a normal trial, charges might be added or subtracted, but those are the charges as it stands. To the charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. I'm now going to have the participants introduce themselves, beginning with the state. Mr. Slisher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Slisher, representing the state of Minnesota.
Good morning. My name is Christina Aronakis, and I'm assisting with the prosecution.
Joshua Larson, also representing the state of Minnesota.
Good morning. Erin Eldridge for the state of Minnesota.
Mr. Nelson, if you'd introduce yourself and your client.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm assisted by my colleague, Amy Voss. We represent the defendant, Derek Chauvin.
All right. Does anybody recognize any of the parties who've just introduced themselves? That is, you're acquainted with them or have any kind of personal relationship with them? Okay, seeing no hands. Does anybody recognize anybody else in the courtroom? And again, not just recognize, but are you familiar with those people by way of acquaintance, friendship, work relationship? Okay, seeing no hands again. Does anybody know other people who work in the Minnesota Attorney General's office who might not be present today but might be present during trial, including Matthew Frank, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Jerry Blackwell, or anybody else who works at the Attorney General's office? Anybody have a relationship with somebody there? Okay, no hands. Anybody have any acquaintance or friendships or relationship with anybody in Mr. Nelson's law firm? Or have any dealings with his office? Okay. Now, you've been given a list of potential witnesses. Please review it before you are questioned individually. The question we will ask is whether you recognize anybody on that list. Now, one of the things the attorneys may not do during jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I do want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence, and they create no inference of guilt. No member of the jury should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made against him or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial, unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. Now, if you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given their testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect, but in determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, their relationship to the parties, their ability and opportunity to know, remember, and relate the facts, their manner, age and experience, frankness and sincerity, or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury you should rely in last analysis upon your own experience, good judgment, and common sense. Now, there are things you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigators. You're not to go out and do any looking, and you are not to ask people about this matter. You are not to use the internet to look for information about this case or about the law. Above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved in the case, the lawyers, the witnesses, or spectators. Do not be offended if the attorneys, parties, or witnesses do not speak to you. They know it would be improper to contact you except through the normal jury selection process, and generally they will confine themselves to a brief greeting. Now, during the selection process, your family and friends will be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, or other social media to announce that you are a potential juror, or to comment on the trial. You may access those social media tools, but please do not publish any information about the case or your thoughts about the case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about this case, and do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Now, because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about this case in the newspapers or online, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. In other words, affirmatively avoid reading or learning about this case. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or any other juror will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom at any time. You will only be referred to by your random number to protect your privacy. The audio of anything you say will be broadcast unless we need to discuss something deeply personal or extremely sensitive or embarrassing, or something that will specifically identify you. And in that case, I will specifically order that the audio not be broadcast outside this courtroom. In that case, you will still have to answer questions on the record, but without audio or video broadcast of any type. Now, with the exception of juror number 63, we're going to have you wait back in the other courtroom until it's your turn to be questioned, and you'll go with the deputy. But let me remind you, we are doing COVID precautions, so please keep social distancing, keep your mask on. I take my mask off only for this part so that you can hear me. When you're individually questioned, I'm going to put mine back on. But we have a lot of plexiglass, but we also have a lot of sanitizer and wipes. Feel free to use them in that courtroom and this courtroom. So with that, if you could go with the deputy, except for juror number 63. All right, juror 63, if you can come on up to the chair right next to me. And have a seat. And you are juror 63, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. A couple things. We have plexiglass in front of you and between us. I'm going to continue to wear my mask, and I've been vaccinated too, so hopefully that'll give you some assurance. And there's plexiglass in front of the attorneys when they ask you questions.
Awesome.
What that means is, if you feel you could be heard better or would be more comfortable, you can take your mask off while you're being examined. And totally up to you if you want to keep it on. I would ask in either case that you pull up to the microphone so that you're pretty close. It doesn't move very well. That's the unfortunate part.
Oh, there.
So if you could just do your best to keep your voice up, that would be appreciated.
Perfect.
And before I turn it over to the attorneys, a couple of questions that I have, but first I need to swear you in so that all of your answers are under oath.
Awesome.
So if you could raise your right hand. You swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that. It was a great help in getting all of us a lot of information about you to start with. Was everything true on that questionnaire?
Yes.
All right. Are there any changes or additions that you can think of at this moment?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. When the attorneys are asking you questions, it might prompt a memory, and I just want to tell you, it's okay to say something different than what's on the questionnaire.
Yeah, okay.
Sometimes in reflection, this was a couple months ago, you realize I should have put this on, or that wasn't quite accurate, or maybe even your opinions have evolved. So you have absolute permission to give a different answer than what's on the questionnaire, because we understand the dynamic of this being written about 2 months ago. So you have heard something about this case, and you listed that there, but the questionnaire advised you not to read any more about it to avoid coverage. But we also understand that sometimes, because it was several months ago, inadvertently you may have been exposed to some information about the case. Maybe you saw a headline or a blurb on the news quick before you could kind of leave the room.
Yeah.
Or maybe even somebody was talking to you about the case and you're in the uncomfortable spot of, I can't tell you that I'm a potential juror.
Yeah.
A tough spot to be in. Any of those circumstances, we understand it's inadvertent. Have you received any new information about the case since when you filled out the questionnaire till today?
I think the only thing that was new that I had heard since I filled out was that drugs could have been involved in the case.
Okay.
I think that's the only thing new that I have heard since.
All right. Whether it's what you put in the questionnaire, heard before the questionnaire, or heard afterwards, do you think you could put all that aside? Because as a juror, the whole point is you have to decide this case just on the evidence and the law that I give you. Put aside what you heard outside the courtroom. Put aside any even opinions you had formed about the evidence. Do you think you could do that?
I believe so. I think that's the objective of any juror to do. I'm a very neutral person, I'd say, but yeah, I'd say that.
Okay.
I don't know much, so putting aside what I do know,
Okay.
I believe I could do that.
And I'm sure the attorneys will follow up a little more on that.
Yeah.
Are there any other facts that you may have been exposed to, not just about the core of the case, but maybe about pretrial matters, about related cases or litigation or anything like that, that might be important for us to know?
I do not believe so. Not that
Okay.
I can think of at the moment. At
And I'm
least.
sure, like I said, if
Yeah.
a specific question prompts.
If I think of something, yeah, for sure. Let you
Okay.
guys know.
Do you recognize any witnesses on the list that you were given?
I did not.
Okay. The trial is going to be 4 weeks long, starting on March 29th. Can you make that work as far as your personal life, the timing, and the amount of time that has to be spent?
So I've recently, since I filled out that questionnaire, did get a job as a teacher.
Okay.
I'm a substitute teacher filling in for a person on maternity leave.
Okay.
So I think that would be almost a conflicting thing. They'd have to find a new substitute for that position.
Okay. But assuming they can do that.
Yes,
Can you-
assuming that they can find a new sub and everything there. I don't believe I have anything else that would interfere.
Okay. I'm going to turn over to the attorneys, but a couple things. We've been talking like in a normal conversation. And in normal conversations, there are affirmations like that.
Yeah.
There are to indicate yes or no. We have to be a little more formal here, only because the court reporter is making a record.
Right.
And so we need yes and no, and we need for people not to talk over each other. So if you could wait till the question is asked and then answer. It's not a normal conversational style. We grant that. So just do your best on that. To be honest, the lawyers and I are the worst offenders on that, not the jurors. So just do your best on that. So with that, with regard to juror number 63, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Your Honor, I was looking at some other information. Did you advise regarding the mask?
She can take it off if she wishes.
Right. Okay.
Leaving it to her.
Okay. I don't remember if you. I apologize. I was not listening to you. Perhaps I shouldn't admit that. Okay. Sorry about that, ma'am. Thank you for being here for us today. I appreciate your patience this morning. What I'd like to do is ask you a series of questions, kind of just get to know you a little bit better, and then ultimately ask you some questions about your questionnaire, your responses to the questionnaire. Not trying to trick you. We understand it was a long time ago you wrote it, and I'll actually probably read you your responses if that's okay. All right?
Sure, of course.
So my first question is, let's assume you and I were to meet in a different social circumstance, a party, an event, or whatever. What are a few things I'd learn about you during the course of that conversation?
I think you'd learn that I'm a very, I'd say, an outgoing person, charismatic. You'd probably hear that I'm a teacher. I love working with kids. I think, I don't know, I'm just a very outgoing, open person,
Okay,
easygoing.
sounds good. And I understand that you have your recent college grad, and you said you just got your first job.
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'll come back to that a little bit later in terms of the timing of the trial and stuff.
For sure.
But congratulations.
Thank you.
So at some point you received this questionnaire and you learned that you were a potential juror in this case. What was your reaction to that?
I was very shocked. I remember receiving the packet and thinking of any other case that it could have been, just some minor case, very unknown to the public. And then I opened it up and I saw what it was, and I was just very just shocked at first, in disbelief. I mean, it's the first time I've ever been called to jury duty, so it was just crazy to me that this was a case that could have been. I was a little worried about it because of how much coverage there is on it, how widespread it is and well known, and everything that has come of it. It made me a little bit worried just for, the safety, and I know that everything's not made public about the jurors and whatnot, but it still made me feel just a little slightly worried, just because you can never be too cautious or too safe in circumstances like this.
Well, let me ask you, so when you came down to the government center this morning and you saw all the fortifications and army and whatever else is going on outside, how did that make you feel in terms of your concerns for your safety?
Kind of mixed, I would say. I think it made me feel very safe that I was around all this security, but also a little worried that there's so much security needed for a situation like this. So it was a little bit mixed feelings about coming into so much security, I guess I would say.
Sure. Now, ultimately, when the judge was just introducing everyone in the case this morning, he informed you that obviously we're taking efforts to protect your anonymity. We're not televising your name or your face. But at some point in the future, it is entirely possible that your name would be known or would become public. How does that make you feel?
It's kind of hard to tell because I think it all depends on how the case almost plays out. It's a little nerve-wracking, I'd say, just because, again, it's a very controversial topic. Both sides feel very strongly, I would say, from what I know. And it can play out one or two ways. And there are people that will be happy, there are people that won't be happy. So I'd say it's a little nerve-wracking to think about. I feel safe, but it's just, you never know what's going to happen in the future.
Sure. Okay. So thinking about your personal life or your professional life and any of the positions you've ever held, can you think of a situation where you were called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Gotta think of a time. I would say in large scale, there hasn't been a time where I've had to do it for a major event, but there has been little times.
Like you may have two friends that are in conflict with each other, right?
Yeah.
So how do you, and both of these friends come to you, right? And they voice their opinions or whatever this conflict is. How do you approach that situation? Meaning, like, how do you try to resolve that conflict between two people?
I think, like in any situation, it depends on who you, well, I guess in saying that we know both people equally, the facts that they present, you have to make them feel comfortable, listen to what they have to say, take in account what they're saying, and then for me, talking through it with them. I refer back to times in college when this has happened, and it's just kind of, for me, when these situations have happened, being there for the people that have brought this situation to me, and just listening and talking it through with them. Really, sometimes it was hard because there was bias. I maybe was included in the events, but trying your hardest, if it's something that's mainly between the two, to listen to the people and help them work through it and everything that they had to say.
Okay. So, I mean, ultimately you understand that your role of a juror, or the role of a juror, is there's large-scale conflict. Obviously, the state has brought criminal charges against Mr. Chauvin, and part of your job, or your primary job, is to resolve that conflict, right? But within the jury room, there would be 12 other or 11 other jurors, 12 total, and conflict may emerge amongst jurors. How do you think, if you were in the jury room and you were part of this case, and there's a particular piece of evidence that comes to light during the course of the trial, and some jurors are looking at that evidence saying, this is the most important piece of evidence, and other jurors are saying, no, this isn't. How do you approach the conflict in that context?
In context like that, I would say, I mean, each person has an opinion. Each person believes that something's important, more important than the other. You really have to listen to what everyone has to say, what they say about that piece of evidence, hear out why they think it's so important, why might they not think it's as important, ask the other people what evidence they think is more important than the one being presented by the other juror, and really listen to everything that each person has to say, take in account what they say. And I mean, we're all forming our own opinions, listening to what has to be presented, so you have to listen to what they have to say while correlating it to what you have thought of and what you have formed opinions about throughout the process.
And what other information may be presented, right?
Correct.
So what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you have to listen to both sides and compare that with other information and compare that with your own formulations. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Now, you understand that your role as a juror, or your job as a juror, is to base your decision on the evidence that is presented in court alone. Do you understand that?
Correct.
And you can do that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Can you think of a situation in your personal life where you have been asked to resolve or determine if someone is lying about something?
I don't know if I've ever been asked to determine that. I think that's always just been something that, I mean, each person has done on their own, based off of how somebody's acting, how somebody is talking about something, up to your own interpretation about whether or not somebody's lying, because you truly don't know unless you're that person.
Well, let me ask you, as a school teacher, right? You may, and I don't know what age group you come or you teach, excuse me, but you have two kids who come to you, and Timmy says this happened and Jenny says this happened, right? How do you determine which of the two is telling the truth about that situation?
Yeah, in a situation like that, I don't really take sides. I just kind of play it off as if both people are telling me the truth, but I have to resolve the situation and make them both feel as if what they're saying is being heard, and find a way to find common ground.
Okay. Ultimately in a trial, you may have two witnesses who are perceiving the same event, right? They're looking at the same piece of evidence, and they may ascribe a certain meaning to that, or they may perceive it differently. So if you have two witnesses that are perceiving the same event at the same time, but they assign a different meaning to that event, or they interpret it differently. How do you resolve that type of a conflict?
That is a good question. I would say, again, you truly don't know who's telling truth, or even if they're lying, because again, like you said, they could be perceiving the situation in a different way, but in the way that they saw it. Again, I think taking in everything that each person says, and then matching, or I guess after, when you have time, thinking about what they said and how it correlates with everything else that we've heard, everything else that has been presented to us. Because you have to assume that everyone's telling the truth or under oath, that what they present is correct, and really seeing how things align with the rest of the facts that are being presented.
Good. All right. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% convinced that you were right, and then you later learned that you were wrong?
No, that's happened plenty of times.
And how do you how do you respond to that type of a situation?
You know, you feel embarrassed when it happens, depending on the situation. Apologizing to whomever you've had that situation with, and then thinking about where the miscommunication in my head might have gone that allowed me to think that I was right when I wasn't, to better understand the person who was right or the other side that was correct.
Okay. Now, ultimately, again, you know, the judge has told you, and I've referenced that you have to decide this case on the facts. That's your job as a judge of the facts, right? That's what jurors do, is to judge what happened in this particular case. And at the end of the case, the judge will give you the law that you need to decide, right? Do you think that you can listen to the law and follow the law even if you think the law is different or should be changed?
I believe so. I mean, following the law is something that I stand by very firmly, and so if it's the law, I believe it's something that you should be following.
Okay. I mean, so if, as the judge tells you, this is the law of this that applies to this particular case, and you think in your mind, law should really be different, that doesn't make sense, can you still follow the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you think it should be changed?
Yes.
So I am going to follow up with some questions specific to your questionnaire. But before I do that, I just kind of wanted to inquire further about your job and things of that nature. So at the time you filled this out, you were looking for a job, right?
Correct.
And you have since found a job in your field of study, and it would require you're a long-term sub, basically, right?
Correct.
And how long, I mean, just generally, have you been in that role a couple of days, a couple of weeks, or did you get the job, you know, a couple months ago?
So I got the job in January, but they recently had somebody leave, and so they switched me from my substitute position just around the school to this long-term sub in the last week.
Okay. And so ultimately, I mean, you know, this is the question is, you would need to find a sub to replace you, or the school would, right?
Correct.
Is that something you're willing to do? I mean, how does that affect you financially, professionally?
Right. I think financially it's a struggle, just because that money that I'm earning is helping me towards debt and whatnot. I don't know how easy it would be for them to find a replacement as well, because teachers are so scarce right now, especially during the pandemic. and I know they were looking for somebody for this position for a while, and then they just switched me into it because they couldn't find anybody. They didn't want to, because I was the building sub. They didn't want to switch me into it, but they had to. So I don't know how easy it would be for somebody to take over that position necessarily. Those are my only concerns, I would say.
Okay. I guess in terms of understanding that jury service is a hardship for everyone,
Yes.
right? Would you be concerned that you're not going to be able to find a job after jury service, or concerned about the students?
I would say I don't know if I'm so concerned about finding a job afterwards. I think it's always a good lead to be in a job in a district, and then from there take on a full-time teacher role. I'm not sure if being away from this scares me so much from that being a possibility. It might be a possibility that it would prevent me, but I don't know necessarily if it would. I just know that if they do not find another long-term sub, the inconsistency of having a different person every day for the kids could be a struggle, especially because the class that it is has some students who need consistency. But those are my only concerns, I would say, so far.
Okay. Are you willing to set that aside, those concerns aside, and be a juror in this case? Or are the concerns so significant that it even is affecting your willingness to be here?
That's a loaded question in a sense that I have thought so much about it, and I am just at such a standstill with how I feel, because I believe it's the civic duty of everyone to do jury duty if they get selected, if they're called, but it's also so important to be with the students, especially during this year where it's been so crazy for them. Everything's been so wishy-washy for them because of the pandemic, and there's been so many changes that I've just been so stuck on that question, stuck on what's the right thing to do.
Right. Can I just have a moment to chat with Counsel, Your Honor? Sure. And one last question, though. Are you teaching in person or remotely?
I am in person.
All right. So I just got to ask you bluntly, right? Would this be a hardship for you to serve on this jury?
I think I'm so torn about it that I feel like my heart is saying that it more than likely would be. I'm so conflicted about the whole situation and whatnot that, yes.
Would the court like to inquire further?
No, the state was doing right. No, All right. Juror 63. I'm going to excuse you. I think it would be a hardship given the current state of your career and the students, and these times have been tough enough for us all. So I'm going to excuse you on hardship ground, and you're also excused from jury service generally. So the deputy, go with the deputy. He'll take some paperwork from you, and then you're free to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was for cause. All right, come on up. morning.
Good morning.
You are juror number 64, correct?
Correct.
All right. We have plexiglass between us in front of you and also in front of the attorneys when they're questioning you.
Okay.
The question, and I'll continue to wear my mask, the upshot being you can remove your mask if you feel more comfortable doing so, but if you would feel more comfortable wearing it, just fine.
Okay.
Occasionally some people prefer just to be able to speak more clearly, but I leave it up to you pretty much.
Okay, sure.
In either case, I would like you to move closer to the microphone so that we can hear your voice. That'd be wonderful. And before I turn it over to the attorneys, first of all, I have to swear you in to make sure all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. It provides us a lot of information to start with. Is everything that you put on there true?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, at least it was.
Well, you kind of anticipate my next question, which is, we recognize that this is months ago that you filled this out. In reflection, you might realize there was something you should have added or even changed, that it was inaccurate and you need to correct it. And even some of your opinions might have evolved and changed. Given all that, you can say something different than what's on your questionnaire, just so that you know that. It's not like you're going to get in trouble. What we want is honest and open and candid information. So if you can do that, that'd be just fine.
Sure.
Most of the time, when I ask that question, people can't come up with anything. But the attorneys are probably going to walk you through some of your specific answers.
Okay.
And they'll even refresh your memory by reading your response.
Sure.
And if it's different or changed, just let them know.
Sure.
Okay? Now, the questionnaire did tell you not to read any more articles and to avoid media on this. But we understand, given the passage of a few months, that inadvertently you may have been exposed to information. You
Sure.
see a headline, a friend talks about it, and we told you don't tell anybody you're a potential juror, so you can't exactly quiet them and leave the room. Did anything like that happen? Did you get exposed to some information inadvertently?
Yes, unfortunately. So I work for a software development company that works for a major news organization that we maintain, own, and support their applications.
Okay.
So coincidentally, right after I got the questionnaire, my team decided it was a good idea to rewrite the code base for one of those applications for better supportability and maintainability going in the future. So the last 3 months, I've been rebuilding this application, staring at this application, and these articles obviously pop up every single time, right? I'm not going into them, reading them, but I'm seeing the headlines every day. There's just no way around it.
Okay, and do you recall the substance of those headlines or the little bit of information you were exposed to?
As far as like the substance,
Either the substance of this case or about pretrial matters or related matters or the attorneys or anything at all?
Not in the moment, no. I mean, unfortunately, this case is the top of the news everywhere, so it's always the very top article.
It's always there, okay.
Yeah.
And the reason we ask this is we understand everybody's been exposed to some information. The question is, can you, as a juror, put aside all that information you've learned, put it in the back of your mind, and even some opinions you may have formed based on what you know, and
Sure.
decide this case just on the evidence you hear in this courtroom based on the law that I give you at the end of the case?
I want to say I can. It's not to say that it's one thing to say something, then something totally different to be in the situation and feel completely different about it. So I want to say yes, but in the moment, my answer is I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to explore that just a little bit.
Sure.
Every juror I've ever met wants to do the right thing.
Sure.
And is willing to do their duty and try. Unfortunately, it can't always be the case. Try, and obviously everyone wants a fair trial. And if you try and give it your best efforts, the question is, can you? And we put you in a tough spot because what we do is we say, well, we know you've been exposed to some things, but can you put that aside when we go forward into this? And you really don't know what it is you're going to hear in this trial.
No.
And so the question is, we really need to probe a little bit to get your best answer, and there's no failure in one answer or the other. The only failure is if you tell me a lie. Do you think, looking inside yourself, that you can, not that you'll try, but that you actually can be fair and impartial here?
I believe I can.
Okay. And the attorneys might follow up on that. So,
Sure.
Continue to think about it, talk about it. So,
Okay.
did you recognize any of the witnesses that were on the list we gave you?
No.
All right. And we did talk about the trial length in the questionnaire. It appears that we'll have about 4 weeks of trial starting on March 29th. If you're selected as a juror, you'd be on your own until then, and then for 4 weeks you'd be essentially working full-time on this. Could you make that work with your personal life and work life?
Yes.
All right. No hardship there as far as you know?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Then with that, I'm going to... Sure. Always good to get advice from the lawyers. And they make a good point, which is, I didn't really ask you this project that you're working on. Are you still working on it, or did you work at? Okay.
I still am working on it. We're at the end of it, but it's not done yet.
Okay. So some of these headlines and information that you've received may have been very recent.
As in yesterday, yes.
Okay, so even as recent as yesterday?
Yeah.
Last Friday or last Thursday even?
Every day.
Okay.
Every day, at least Monday through Friday.
Okay. And you pretty much, like you say, it's kind of the news of the day that just about every day when you're working on this and it pops up?
It's always the top.
Okay. What headlines do you recall at all? Like, what did they say?
The most recent one would be the settlement.
Okay.
Right before that, I think the most recent one would have been, it was a history of George Floyd. Yeah, those are the most recent ones I've seen.
All right. Counsel, have any further questions? All right. I think given your good faith exposure to it, I know you weren't seeking it out, but...
it's not, I mean, like, sorry, boss, I can't work on this, but, you know...
Yeah, because I'm a potential juror, and
Yeah.
I know you couldn't say that. We know it was good faith, and so, but given the saturation that you've received through your work, I think we're going to excuse you from this panel. So we appreciate your honesty in that and bringing that to our attention. You're also released from jury service generally, so unless we send you summons in a few years, you're good to go.
Okay.
All right, you can go with the deputy. They'll take some paperwork from you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sure. All right, let's do the next juror. All right, good morning.
Morning.
You are juror 66, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. First of all, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath, so raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony or that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
Okay. I'll also advise you that we have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you. The attorneys will have plexiglass in front. I will also continue to wear a mask. The upshot being, you can take off your mask if you wish, or if you either for comfort or because you think you'd be heard more clearly, It's totally your call. In either case, I would like to have you pull up to the microphone so that we can hear you nice and loud. And thank you, first of all, for filling out the questionnaire. We got a lot of good information from that. In fact, I'm going to have you write something for me in a little bit that I'm going to have you write it just so you keep your identity, because it might tend to reveal who you are, and we don't want to do that. We're being very careful about that.
Okay.
First of all, the questionnaire, was everything true on that?
Yes.
All right. Anything you wanted to change or add to that questionnaire?
I don't think so, but it was, again,
Months
months
ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to feel comfortable in changing or adding to the questionnaire, because we realize you fill it out, a couple months go by, you reflect and you realize some things are inaccurate or incomplete. Maybe your opinions have evolved. So anything you want to change, and most of the time it's going to happen when one of the attorneys asks you a question and you say, well, that was my answer at that time, here's what you need to know now. Perfectly fine. I want you to feel comfortable being able to change or add to your questionnaire answers. Okay? Now, the advisory in the questionnaire was also to not read any more articles or go online. But we also recognize that between when you fill out the questionnaire and today, a couple months have passed, and inadvertently, you may have been exposed to some information about the case, related cases, similar cases, something about this case that you think we should probably know that you've been exposed to. Anything like that happen?
It's kind of hard to avoid it.
It is.
Completely right now. And, I have gotten some information from the news, just kind of like how this jury process is run too, because when you get that little piece of paper in the mail, you don't get a lot of information. So, I have seen a little bit on the news just based on like how this is going. Mm-hmm.
Actually, it probably just filled you in a little bit on how we're getting the job done, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Anything about the substance of the case or any related cases that you can recall?
Nothing that stands out, no.
Other than the information you just talked about, how recently do you think you've been exposed to information about this case or related cases?
Really just this case as far as like when people are getting selected, knowing kind of how many have been picked.
Okay. Anything from like last week, or are we talking?
Yeah, last week.
Okay, and that's pretty much the procedures we're using.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else recently that you've heard of?
Nothing stands out.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. The whole point of this probing on how much you know about the case is for you to give us your honest opinion about yourself on whether you can put all that aside. Everybody who's come into this courtroom knows something about the case. It's some accurate, some not so accurate. But the bottom line being, you have to put all that aside as a juror, decide this case only on the evidence and the law that you receive from me at the end of the case. And the question for you is, can you do that?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about the potential one way and the potential the other way.
I don't know. I'm just kind of nervous.
That's okay. Almost everybody in that chair is nervous. You don't seem nervous, though, I'll tell you. You hide it well.
The mask helps.
Okay. But the only thing you have to worry about here is just telling the truth. So I hope when we get into a more conversational tone of this and hope you understand we don't try and be confrontational, although we have to probe into your personal life a little bit. Mm-hmm. We apologize for that, but it is necessary. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to jump actually right to one of those items that you did indicate on your questionnaire that you have a relative who is a state trooper. Mm-hmm. And if you were to name that person, that would probably identify you, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We're trying our best to keep you anonymous. So what I'm going to do, and don't lean over because the camera angles are such that we don't want you to be in a camera shot. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. I'd like you to write that relative's name down so I can share it with the attorneys, if you would. Mm-hmm. Technology is not as good as we thought, so we're just going to share the paper with the attorneys. if that's
Okay.
all right. And while they're looking at that, I'll just ask you straight out, that name was not on the witness list that you saw, correct?
No, this is my cousin.
Okay. Is there anything, or is anybody else on that witness list look familiar to you?
Yes.
Okay, and who is that?
Jason Otto
Okay.
is a friend of a friend, or I'm co-workers with his husband and friends with him.
Okay, and what is his occupation?
He is the Minneapolis Park Police.
Okay.
I don't know his exact title.
All right. If that person actually testified in the case, do you think that your relationship with them might make it hard for you to be fair, or to put aside, oh, well, I know that person, so they're going to be higher in credibility automatically just because I know them, or do you think you can treat them like any other witness?
I would probably take their views as higher, yes.
Because you have a
Friendship.
friendship with him, and so pretty much take everything he says without a grain of salt, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay. Council, why don't we do this? We're going to try this again. See
Okay.
if it works. And what I'm talking to the lawyers about is this person going to be a central witness? Does not appear so. In fact, might not even be called. Knowing that, do you think you could still remain impartial in deciding this case?
No.
Okay, tell me why.
I don't want to be a part of this trial.
Okay.
So I think that's a big part of it.
Okay. Any specific reason? I'm going to flip to the last question on the questionnaire because I think that might be the best.
From when I filled out the questionnaire till now, more life changes have happened. Recently sold my house and would be moving out of our home during the trial, which would
Okay.
be really stressful if I can't help with that. I also have a child under 1 that I don't want to be away from them for that long.
Okay. And also, if you're deliberating and it goes overnight, you'd be kept in a hotel. You understand that?
Yeah.
Does that work?
No.
Okay. Let me talk to the lawyers one more time. Do you think it would be a hardship, basically?
Sorry?
Do you think it would be a hardship for you to
Yes.
serve on the jury? Okay, you're pretty adamant about that, too. Okay. Mr. Nelson? Mr. All right. I'm going to excuse you on the basis of hardship from this case.
Thank you.
Sigh of relief for the record. That's all right. It shows you're being honest. You can go with the deputy. You are also released from jury service generally, so you don't have to report for any other cases.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
unless you get a summons in the future, a couple years from now. So, okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right. You bet. Just an observation, 8 out of the last 11 have been cause, so we're grinding to a halt. Nobody's fault, obviously. Cause is cause, so, but just an observation. We'll go with number 67. Okay, come on up and have a seat. Good morning. You are juror number 67?
Yes.
All right. Well, first thing I'm going to do is swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm going to continue to wear my mask. You have plexi between us and plexiglass in front of you, and also the attorneys have plexiglass in front of them. The upshot being, if you wish for either comfort or to be heard more clearly, feel free to remove your mask while you're being examined. Totally up to you, but whether you have it on or not, if you could pull up a little bit to the microphone doesn't work well.
How's that?
It works, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. It is not very flexible, so you have to move instead of the microphone. So with that, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that because it provided a lot of good information for us. Is everything on that questionnaire true?
Yes.
And I sometimes say still true because it's been months, and so we recognize that there may be information that you realize on reflection was wrong and you need to correct, or stuff you should have added to it, or maybe even your opinions have evolved. In any case, right now, can you think of anything that you would add or subtract?
No.
Okay. The attorneys in their questioning might prompt a memory or something. Feel free to volunteer any of the information. The bottom line is I want you to feel comfortable adding or subtracting. If it's different from what was in the questionnaire, that's just fine, given the passage of time. Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles about the case to avoid the media about it. And have you been able to do that pretty much?
Yeah, for the most part.
All right. Several months have passed since the questionnaire, and so we recognize that sometimes inadvertently you get exposed to some information, either about this case or about related cases, or the attorneys, parties, whatever, something that could be relevant to sitting on this case. Have you been exposed to anything like that, like a headline, a newspaper blurb before you're able to turn the channel, anything like that?
So I've seen just like jury selection has started, article, headline.
Yeah.
I don't really
Okay.
read the news.
Okay, well, that's fine. Other than the procedures we're using, which are now not a big surprise because you've been subjected to them, anything else you can think of that you may have seen?
No.
What do you think was the most recent thing you've seen about, been exposed to?
Just that, jury selection had started.
Oh, okay, great. Now, the whole point we go over that, and everybody's got some information about the case in the past year. The question is, can you put all that aside, what you've heard outside the courtroom, and decide the case just on the evidence you hear in the courtroom and the law that I give you?
Yes.
Okay. Any concerns about that? Being able to kind of separate and...
No.
Okay, excellent. All right. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list you were given?
No.
All right. The trial is going to be about 4 weeks long, we estimate, and it's going to start March 29th at 9 a.m. and go for about 4 weeks, where you're essentially working full time on the case. Does that work for you both as personal life and professional life?
I will make it work, yes.
And that's the key phrase. We understand that to some extent, jury duty can be a burden on everybody, but if you can make it work, that's what we need to know. So I appreciate your distinction there. It's a very important one. All right. Unless you have any questions for me, I'm going to turn over to the attorneys.
Nope.
All right. Then as to juror number 67, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It wasn't really my choice, but here we find ourselves. So what I'd like to do, sir, is I'd like to ask you a series of just kind of general questions about yourself, get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on your responses to the questionnaire, okay? When we get to the questionnaire part, I know it's a couple months ago you filled this out, and not trying to trick you, I'll read you your responses and things of that nature, okay? So let's assume that you and I were to meet in a different circumstance, a social event of some kind, a party, whatnot. What are a couple of things that I would walk away knowing about you after our first conversation?
Probably what I do and about my family.
Okay. And again, without disclosing, it's my understanding you're like a youth minister? Is that correct?
I'm an executive director
Okay.
of the organization, yeah.
Of a youth organization?
Yes.
Okay. At some point, you got this packet of information that said you were a potential juror in this case. You recall that?
Yes.
And do you recall what your initial reaction was to learning that you were a potential juror in this case?
Oh boy.
All right.
I'm also honored to be able to serve
Okay.
in this capacity.
All right. Why, oh boy?
I haven't been selected for jury duty before, and being my first time and the nature of the case.
Right. And we understand you had, I'm sure, heard about the case beforehand and things of that nature, right?
Yes.
It's obviously, significant news. Did you have concerns about your personal safety in that regard?
A little bit, like, I've got a family and things like that, and just in general, but
Okay.
I know that everything's being done to maintain anonymity.
All right. And how did you feel when you came to the government center this morning and saw its current condition?
Makes sense.
Okay. And do you understand that at some point, we don't know when, but it's very possible that your name would be released publicly?
Yes.
And are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. In your personal or professional life, can you think of a situation where you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Yes.
So how do you approach a situation when two people are having a dispute?
Seek to understand both sides and find common ground.
Okay. And how about, well, let me ask you, you as a potential juror in this case, there's obviously a big dispute for you to resolve, which is the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, right? But within that jury room, there may be disputes that arise. How do you, let's take a hypothetical, right? One group of jurors is looking at a particular piece of evidence and saying it's extremely important. Another set of jurors is disagreeing with that and thinks it's irrelevant, that same piece of evidence. How do you approach that situation?
Again, kind of try to go back to finding out what we have common ground on, and then having each of the parties kind of express why they believe that it is important, and then trying to come to an agreement.
Okay. And if you were the juror who thought that this piece of information was super important and others disagreed with you, so you're now not trying to resolve the dispute, you're part of the dispute. How do you deal with that?
I would want to check my own bias and try to understand if I'm, thinking wrongly about it, and be willing to be open and listen to others' input.
Okay. Are you willing to re-examine your own beliefs or your own perspectives about something?
Yes, of course.
What if you don't change your opinion after you re-examine your own bias? What if you're convinced it's still the most important piece of evidence and others disagree with you? Do you abandon your belief simply for the sake of consensus?
I don't think I would abandon it, but I would try to continue to move forward with other parts of the whole trial. If that makes sense.
In your personal or professional life, can you think of a situation where you have been called upon to determine whether someone is telling the truth about a situation?
Yes.
Okay. How do you approach that situation?
I'd ask a lot of questions and just try to get a read on the person, and try to empathize with them as well, and see, from their perspective, what's going on.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you have been 100% convinced of something only to later learn you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. And tell me, what's your response to a situation like that?
I'm apologetic, kind of blown away at how convinced I can be at something and then be totally wrong. It's humbling.
Okay. And if you were a juror in this case, you understand that you you would be a judge in a sense, a judge of the facts of what happened. But at the end of the case, the judge is going to give you the law that you have to apply the facts as you determine them to be. Can you apply the law that the judge gives you, even if you think it is wrong or should be changed?
Yeah.
Okay. No problem with that?
No.
And you believe that you can be a fair and impartial juror as a part of this process?
Yes.
So I'm going to follow up with some questions on your questionnaire.
Yeah.
And I want to start by, again, thanking you for taking the time to fill this out. We understand that everybody has some degree of knowledge. This is obviously a major case, and that everybody has some degree of knowledge about what's happened, or what's alleged to have happened, I should say. So the first question you were asked is to just kind of write what you knew. And you wrote, the police were responding to a suspected counterfeit bill and pulled over George Floyd, who was driving under the influence. Mr. Floyd resisted, and Derek Chauvin put his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck to restrain him. Mr. Floyd died in that position in police custody. There are more details, I'm sure, but I don't recall them all exactly. That's what you wrote. Since writing that, I think the judge has asked you a few questions about what else you may have learned, and that was limited to sort of the jury selection process. Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. Nothing else stands out in terms of what you recall about this event?
No.
All right. You were asked a couple of questions about your general impression of Mr. Chauvin, as well as your general impression of Mr. Floyd, and you checked both somewhat negative and neutral as applied to both individuals. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's fair to say that to some degree you have formed a negative impression of Mr. Chauvin. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And that's okay. You're perfectly entitled to your opinion. And is that simply, as I understand what you wrote, is I don't know them or fully understand the situation they were facing in the moment, but Mr. Floyd died in their custody. That's what you wrote. So explain to me why you have a somewhat negative opinion of Mr. Chauvin as well as a neutral beyond what you wrote.
Yes. So I haven't met either of them, so I don't know them. I don't know the situation that they were in. But for both parties, it just looks bad. And so, given that, I have a somewhat negative.
I mean, someone died, right? And that's tragic and sad, right?
Yes.
With respect to Mr. Floyd, you wrote, again, I don't know him personally, but he was under the influence and resisted police.
Right.
And so you formed a somewhat negative impression of Mr. Floyd because of what you understand to be the facts about him at that time.
Correct.
That's a fair assessment?
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, obviously I just want to make sure you're the right juror. You wrote that you had seen some video of Mr. Floyd's death, and I want to make sure we're talking about the same video. A video was taken by a bystander. That video was uploaded to a social media platform. That video went viral and became a news story. Is that the video that you understood this question to be about?
Yes.
Other than that video, have you seen any other videos that were released publicly?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So there were some body camera videos that were released. There were some store or some security surveillance videos. You never saw those?
No.
And you checked that you had seen that bystander video 2 to 3 times. So was it, let me ask you this, did you see a long form or a more complete version, or did you see clips on the news?
Yeah, I saw clips on the news or like on social media, just, scrolling as pops up kind of thing.
Okay. Did you ever watch what we would describe as the entire bystander video?
No, not in entirety.
Okay. You were asked about your conversations with family, friends, or social media commentary that you may have made, and you wrote that you had talked about it, and that Mr. Floyd, your opinion was that Mr. Floyd's death was wrong, and we should speak up and speak out against racism.
Mm-hmm.
So you used the word wrong. What did you mean by Mr. Floyd's death was wrong?
That he shouldn't have had to die. Whatever caused that death, I'm not sure of, but someone died, and that is wrong.
Okay. And how does his death attach to conversations about racism?
Because I think that was the main conversation that everyone was having, was that it was a white police officer and an African American man.
Okay. And I mean, so again, it's your right to have an opinion and your right to form those opinions based on your own experiences, your own belief system, and nobody's questioning that, right? The question becomes, however, can you take those opinions that you formed, can you set them aside and judge this case exclusively on the evidence that is presented in court?
Yes.
And even if you may have learned certain information from those conversations or from the media, some of that information may not be in court. Can you set that information aside and judge it exclusively based on what's in court?
Yes.
All right. You were asked a question about whether you had participated in any demonstrations or marches, and you wrote, no, but we did talk to our kids about it and pray for everyone involved. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
After everything was happening, we shared with our kids at home just kind of what was going on, and tried to explain it to them, and then prayed for everyone involved and prayed for everyone that was going out and protesting and marching, and prayed for the families and everyone involved. Yeah.
Did that include Mr. Chauvin?
Yes.
You were asked a couple of questions about the aftermath, so to speak, of Mr. Floyd's death. In terms of the protests, you indicated that a couple of businesses that you frequent or have been to were vandalized in the course of the riots. Anything about that situation? Like, have you had conversations with those store owners about their experiences?
No.
Okay. You just happen to have been to a place and it was looted or vandalized in the rioting, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You were asked whether you felt the aftermath had a negative or positive effect on the protests. And you wrote, I think the whole community has been affected in both positive and negative ways, yet I hope that we are all better people as a result of it all. Right? So let me ask you this. Do you draw a distinction between protesting and rioting?
Yes.
Can you explain for me what you see the difference in those two things to be?
I think that protesting is peacefully gathering to raise awareness about a social cause or a cause that you have, whereas rioting is just kind of going wild in the streets.
Okay. And do you associate those individuals who were peacefully protesting with the rioting?
No. I think some of them may have crossed over in some ways, but no, there was peaceful protesting, and then there was also rioting.
Okay. You were asked a series of questions about your contact with police in your personal life, and whether you or someone close to you had been a victim of a crime. And I need to ask you, or just tell you, you obviously have a right to have that kept private, because you answered a question that I'd like to ask you about. And so, are you comfortable talking about what you wrote here in court today?
Yes.
Okay. You wrote that when you were young, your parents would fight and the police would get called to those situations at times?
Yes.
Okay. How old were you approximately when that was happening?
Probably about, I think it was about, well, it was multiple times, so.
I'm sorry?
It was multiple times.
Oh, gotcha.
So I would say age 11, 12 through like 15, 16.
Okay. So your parents had a relatively tumultuous relationship?
Yes.
And when you say when things got out of control, you would call the police yourself?
I did, and then my sister did as well.
Okay. Did those events turn physical? Is that what you mean by out of control, or
Yes.
just okay? And when the police came or responded, you wrote that you felt that you were somewhat satisfied based on their response, and you wrote, "I don't remember the police as much as the situation." So do you think that based on what you do remember of the police involvement in those events, do you think that they handled the situation well as far as you were concerned?
I think so, yes. I was just more focused on my parents and, not the officers.
Right, understood. And were either of your parents ever arrested as a result of these?
Yes.
Okay. Were you ever called upon as a witness or to be a witness against your parents in court?
No.
Okay. Do you know if your parents had to go through the legal either one of your parents, whichever one it was, had to go through the legal system as a result of those incidents?
I don't think so. It was just kind of they were drunk and fighting and would sleep it off and then come home.
Okay, gotcha. So alcohol was involved in these disputes?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about those memories that would affect or impact your ability to be a fair or impartial juror, both as it applies to Mr. Chauvin, but also to the state of Minnesota?
Could you state the question again?
Sure. Sorry, it was a little confusing. I mean, we all come to this with our own personal life experiences, right? And you know yourself better than we do, and I'm asking you whether anything about your kind of upbringing or these situations with your parents that would bias you against either Mr. Chauvin or the state of Minnesota?
No.
Okay. You can set that aside. You recognize it's a different situation than what we're dealing with here.
Yes.
Okay. You were also asked about whether you had ever seen the police use more force than was necessary, and you wrote, "One time in Georgia, some police thought we broke into a skate park. They were not physically forceful, but verbally quite aggressive for the situation." Can you tell me more just about what happened in that situation?
Yeah, so we showed up at a skate park and the owner had hidden a key for us, and so we went in and were skating in the park in the middle of the night, and police officers arrived and thought we had broke in, and were pretty forceful in their language and how they treated the situation because of their perspective, and we were like, it's okay, it's fine, we have a key, the owner let us in, and so it was kind of just a misunderstanding. But I do understand from their perspective, like, we were in the park and it's closed. So it makes sense.
And it was, you said, the middle of the night?
Yes.
Okay. And so you understand that they may have perceived that as a crime occurring, right?
Right.
And when you say that they were aggressive in their language, were they like cursing at you and things of that nature, or were they just very forceful in their, like were they yelling at you?
Very forceful.
Okay. But ultimately, you were able to resolve this misunderstanding?
Yes.
Okay. You recognize that sometimes police officers have to use verbal force?
Yeah.
Anything about that situation that would, again, either bias you against Mr. Chauvin or the state of Minnesota?
No.
Okay. You were asked if you have ever been put in a chokehold, and you checked the box yes, and you said just as a kid, probably wrestling with friends. Like someone grabbed you around the neck or something, or what happened there?
Yeah, just in wrestling, hanging out with buddies, you know.
Okay. But you've never received any formal training on how to put someone in a chokehold or being put in a chokehold in any way?
Correct.
All right. So there are a series of questions, or I should say statements on this questionnaire, and you were asked to rank your thoughts on these questions, or your agreement or disagreement about these statements. Do you remember that generally? I know you don't remember the exact statements, but do you remember that generally in this process?
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay. So I'm just going to read a couple to you and ask you to kind of explain why you may have answered these that way. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. You wrote, police in my, or the statement was, police in my community make me feel safe. And you somewhat agreed with that. Why would you somewhat agree with that versus strongly agreeing with that or disagreeing with that?
Sorry, what did I put again?
Somewhat agree. I somewhat agree.
Yeah, so I would say, like, most of the time, yes. Sometimes being a skateboarder, you know, you get yelled at and stuff like that, and so it's like, well, I don't feel safe when I'm being yelled at for cruising down the street or whatever. But
okay.
So
in your hobby as a skateboarder, you've been hassled by the cops here and there.
Yeah.
Skating where you're not supposed to skate, kind of a thing.
Yes.
All right. And do you recognize they're simply telling you to follow the law?
Yes.
All right. Anything about that would make you biased again? You understand this case involves a Minneapolis police officer, and there will be police officers who testify in this case. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Anything about your feelings or those experiences that, again, would bias you for or against either party?
No.
All right. The statement is read. The statement reads, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And that's an awkward phrase, but so discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And you somewhat agreed with that. Can you explain your thinking in that?
So I think discrimination does exist. I think that the media amplifies it for good reasons or bad reasons. I think the media just amplifies it.
Okay. There is a comment or a statement here that says, police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, and you somewhat disagreed with that.
I think that, again, most of the time, I think that there is some equal treatment, but there is times when there is, where people are treated differently because of the color of their skin.
Okay. And then there was a statement that says, I think that news reports about police brutality against racial minorities is only the tip of the iceberg, and you strongly agreed with that statement. Why would you strongly agree with that statement?
Because could you read the statement one more time?
I sure can. I think that news reports about police brutality against racial minorities is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, because I think that, again, the media tries to amplify all of the situations. I think there are a lot of broken pieces to our whole system and racism and justice, and so I think it is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things that we need to work on as humans together, but I think that the media tries to amplify it, which can be good or bad, depending on how they do it.
Okay. You were asked a couple of questions about your perceptions relevant to the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter, whether they be movements, organizations, or a combination of both. And you wrote that you are very favorable that Black lives do matter, but not favorable of the BLM organization. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I don't know a whole lot about the BLM organization, but I do believe that Black lives do matter.
Okay. And with respect to the Blue Lives Matter statement, you described that you were very favorable of the Blue Lives Matter, and you wrote, I am for life, both black and blue.
Yes.
Just a couple of other questions here. You were asked a series of questions about your opinions regarding the the justice system. And you were asked, do you believe that the jury system in this country is a fair system? Why or why not? And you wrote, my general assumption is yes, but I don't really know because of my limited knowledge. So can you just, again, expand on that a little bit? Like, are you just saying, I don't know anything about how the jury system works, and you're assuming it? I mean, explain.
Yeah, I assume that, yes, it is fair. I think that we work hard to try to make it as fair as possible, but again, I don't know all of the inner workings of it, and so, yeah.
Okay. The second question was, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And you wrote, it depends on how you define works, and in quotes. And you said, I think sometimes it does and sometimes it does not. There is no perfect system. So how would you define the word works in that context?
So I would say that is justice administered? And I would say, again, majority of the time, yeah. But sometimes we get it wrong.
Okay. You were asked about the presumption of innocence in criminal cases, and you wrote, I agree and I am thankful for this liberty, yet in my faith we are all guilty of wrong, and you cite a biblical reference. You understand that the so-called moral law is not applicable here. Do you understand that?
Correct.
The judge will define what the law is for you, and your job would be to determine whether or not there is a conviction or an acquittal in this case. Do you understand?
Yes.
And that would be regardless of your faith.
Right.
You were asked whether you wanted to serve as a juror in this case, and you checked yes, and you wrote, I would like to participate in justice. Can you define the word justice for me here?
That which is just and right.
Okay. Do you have you formed an opinion one way or another what constitutes justice in this case?
No.
Would you agree that justice could involve a not guilty verdict?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
All right. Juror number 67, we're going to excuse you from this panel, and also from jury service generally, so you won't be needed on another case. And so you can go with the deputy, they'll take some paperwork from you, and you can go about your business. Thank you, though, for taking the time for the questionnaire and answering our questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, let's take our 20-minute mid-morning break. 11:15, please.